morning and good morning, Senator. I know that today it's going to be, something we've talked about in the past. It's continuing to happen, which is, the Palestinian pogroms. In particular, we want to kind of touch on what's going on in the West Bank, but also what's going on still happening in Gaza. So I want to go ahead and pass it to you, Senator. I know that, this is a topic that kind of touches us both, and we're just kind of in shock about how, the events are continuing to unfold.
Yes, Morgan. Let me start by saying one of the most encouraging things about the very robust discussion about Israel and the morality of the actions that it's taking. One of the most comforting things, I guess, is the fact that many of the most vocal opponents of Israeli policy are American Jews. I may have mentioned before, but during the intelligence up briefings that I've gotten, I was surprised when this thing first blew up with protests and so forth to discover that it was Jewish groups and individuals who had played one of the most prominent roles, perhaps in Washington, D.C., the most prominent role. And so, the tendency is to say, well, if someone criticizes Benjamin Netanyahu or Ben Gvir, or if somebody criticizes the Israeli longtime practice of kneecapping young teenagers in order to make them crippled for life so that they'll burden the community, or some of the other really terrible things that go on. The accusations, well, you're anti-Semitic, and of course that doesn't quite jive with the fact that many of the leaders of exposing this stuff are Jewish people, Jewish leaders. So I don't think the assertion of anti-Semitism holds much water. Now, I started thinking about this. When we're thought about the Holocaust and all of this stuff, usually the story begins with something called Kristallnacht, and this was a time back in 1938 when the Nazi Party was very much in the ascendancy, and there was sort of a coordinated uprising of Nazi elements, Nazi sympathizers against the Jewish people in Germany, and there were a lot of them. And so what happened during Kristallnacht is that there was this orchestrated campaign to destroy Jewish homes, Jewish places of worship, and businesses. And Kristallnacht, it was called the Night of the Broken Glass because the plate glass windows, Jewish stores were broken, and it was described as a brutal state-sponsored anti-Jewish pogrom in November 1938. And Nazi forces, the brown shirts, which were paramilitary and civilians, they torched 1,400 synagogues. They vandalized 7,500 Jewish homes, and they murdered close to 100 people. Now, afterwards, there were really the only punishments administered were by the Nazi Party. They were relatively light, and they involved the looting of some of the stores when the looted goods were taken for personal use instead of turned over to authorities. And also there were some minor punishments meted out for some sexual assaults during this time. But for the most part, um, the people who carried out Kristallnacht were not punished. Now, I think it's helpful for us to reflect back on that. And of course, I think most people these days are, um, you're too young. This is really ancient history. What happened back in 1938? Well, it's kind of like when I was growing up. What happened during the Civil War? What was this was old stuff. But I think it is important because generations are indoctrinated, re-indoctrinated about how there should be this feeling of guilt over what happened to Jews back in the 30s. Much of it's getting back close to 100 years that we're talking about, 80, 100 years. And so I think the question comes, are today, we need to live it today. Today is what we can rectify. We can't rectify what people did a century ago. But are the Jewish settlers of today in some way morally superior to the Nazis? I'm sure who orchestrated this. And so I just changed some of the wording from the description of Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass, and just substitute what's going on today. And so we can reword it to say, aren't we really seeing a brutal state-sponsored anti-Palestinian party with IDF forces, armed Jewish paramilitary, and violent Jewish mobs destroying Palestinian homes, business, and don't the Palestinian lands today, whether it's the Gaza Strip, whether it is the West Bank, don't they truly resemble mass concentration camps? And I think it's beneficial, and I wish that people living in Israel would reflect on it, because they study this. This is sort of in a way, unfortunately, the messages of the Holocaust are employed as against people who had probably nothing to do with it. And so you go back and you guilt people because they had a relative who did this or that. You guilt them. You had Pope Benedict, who had been part of the Nazi youth, the Hitler. And I do part of Hitler Youth, and the Hitler Youth basically very much like this, only sort of accelerated level of patriotism. So it's easy for us to sort of misinterpret things over time, and but I think it's important, and I wish that the Jewish elements who are clearly opposed to what's going on under Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir, I wish they could somehow impress this upon the Jewish elements within Israel,
Mhm.
because the brutality is amazing there.
Yeah, I think you touched on some very important points. The first thing being, the organizations such as Jewish Voices for Peace, who are speaking out against the destruction of Gaza and the continued settlement within, the extended settlements that are happening in the West Bank. What their actions are very brave. They are combating a, previous generation that did not question Israel. And another point that you're alluding to is, through the history that's kind of really drilled into us, which is the horrors of World War II and the Holocaust. A lot of the people within Israel that are, very proud of the action Israel's taking, their trauma is being weaponized in a way where it's okay that we do this to them because we don't want this to happen to us again. Never again is in essence not never again for everybody. It's never again for particularly for the Jewish people to undergo such horrific actions done to them. And you have the new generation, the generation that is taking these organizations of Jewish Voices for Peace, who are looking at those sayings never again and subscribing it to the Palestinian people as well. They're saying that what they're viewing happening to the Palestinians is reminiscent to what happened in their textbooks, what they learned happened to their great grandfathers, and they are horrified that these actions are done in their name, and they see what is unfolding before their eyes. There's this new thing that it's really pushed to us, that the anti-Semitism, while there is this string of anti-Semitism that is forming, and it's forming as a reaction to the horrors that we've seen Israel conduct in Gaza, in the West Bank, and telling the American people that it's being done in the name of the protection of Jewish people. So you have people having this ultimate reaction that is, some speculate that it is Israel Likud party is doing this primarily on purpose because you want to have a safe place for the Jewish people, is what they subscribe. So if you create such a turmoil where people start to turn on Jewish people, they feel like there is still this necessity to have Israel, and it's kind of Jewish supremacy ideology that they're putting primarily in the Likud party. So I think that's all very interesting. When you look at the historical, what's happened in history, pardon me, and you have this two diverging views of how people are taking it. You have people who are applauding these extreme actions that's being done by the Likud party and saying that we're doing this because we don't want this to happen to the Jews again. Then you have other people who are understanding the history, that anyone can be a fascist. Anyone can take these atrocious actions, and it should be completely called out, whether it's someone that you view as yourself. So I think that's very interesting. We add the historical component into it, and I think it's interesting to look at how different people have viewed it. Like the people in Israel, they view it as these are trauma stories that we will no longer accept, but we will take these actions against other people and their children, in aims that this will never happen to me particularly.
Yeah, I saw a video early on that was probably the most shocking thing that I have seen in terms of human suffering. And it was a single girl, my guess is 10 years old, and I and what it was, she had been blasted. Her face was literally falling off, and I've got to say, it brought me to tears. And I have carried casualties from the battlefield, who sometimes decomposed bodies. I'm not I'm not someone with a delicate constitution, but this little girl, she actually was able to stand on her own feet. people were trying to help her, but literally large pieces of her face were falling off. And it just, you just found yourself, you know, just saying, you know, what do I pray for this girl? Do I pray that she lives, or do I pray that she's just taken? I'm sure she has died. I mean, there's no way, and of
Yeah.
course, there's no medical attention allowed. The Israelis deny any kind of medical attention. They've systematically destroyed all the hospitals. They've blocked medications, and so a child like this doesn't have anything. There's not even something to take care of the pain. And I looked at her, and although her face was gone, you could see from her eyes, you could see she had been a very pretty girl. She was just just a very nice looking little girl. And she's caught up in the middle of this Jewish Holocaust
Hmm.
that is being imposed on. She didn't have anything to do with anybody.
Yeah.
Um, and let me just give you a couple of the figures. Now,
Yes. I think that's very important. We spoke backstage with he's a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Mark Perlmutter, the doctor who has gone into Gaza, and he's spoken extensively of the horrors that he witnessed. This isn't some doctor that has never seen the horrors of of war, and he's been to every battleground. Um, he's gone to Ukraine. He was actually at Ground Zero in 9/11 rendering aid. He was that in Haiti during both earthquakes. So he has seen some true horrors. But he said none of it compares to what he had witnessed in Gaza. And he talked about most times if they could patch a child up, most likely they would die within days because there was no antibiotics. So it was just a futile effort that drained him, and he came back. And there is a documentary about him that is running around the nation. It's making a lot of coverage. It's called American Doctor, with him and two other doctors that are talking about the targeting of the hospitals that you just spoke about.
yeah, I recall. I'm not sure whether it was Dr. Perlmutter or Tony Aguilar. The discussion about there was a surgeon who was in one of the few remaining places where they were operating on casualties, and he was in the middle of conducting an operation when the IDF soldiers burst in, and he was ordered to get out. Now, this was a man who literally had a patient's life in his hands in the midst of surgery, and he continued to operate rather than just let his patient die. And the soldier kneecapped him, which is
Mhm.
absolutely Israeli doctrine. Is if you want to destroy somebody, and if you want to impose on all the surrounding people the burden of caring for them, you blast them through the knee so that they're crippled for the rest of their lives. And this is what happened to the surgeon. Um, these are not isolated things. These are things that are going on. They're encouraged, and here are just a few of
Mhm.
the numbers I wanted to mention. Now, keep in mind, Kristallnacht was an incident that occurred in one moment in time over several days, perhaps, um, but still the numbers are kind of relevant because I'm going to be looking at sort of a 2 year, 2 3 year period. But anyway, the thing that sort of made headlines in the New York Times back in 1938 was that 7,500 Jewish homes and businesses had been vandalized. Well, the you have you have 5,900 Palestinians who have been driven from their homes and their lands since January 23. Now, this is not driven out of lands that the Israelis didn't dominate. The Israelis have dominated. The Gaza Strip was essentially a large strip of land packed with people who were not permitted to travel, to go out. They couldn't go out by sea. They couldn't go out by air, and certainly in the West Bank, the Israelis occupied. It's under military rule, and same thing with Jerusalem, and yet here within lands that are controlled by Israel, 5,900 Palestinians are driven from their homes and lands, and the Israeli authorities destroyed at least 3,350 Palestinian homes and properties. And consider, Israel is a very small country. It's about 9 million people, which really shows you the comparative size of Gaza, which was, I forget what, 2.5 million.
Yeah, it's like 2.1 million, with the vast majority of them being children. They're children because of the rate at which Israel conducts a policy called putting Gaza on a diet, where they do the math on the caloric intake, where someone is surviving, but they're not living. They're not getting the necessary nutrients to live. So you have a lot of people that manage to die early. We've talked about these airstrikes, after October 7th, but they were conducting these airstrikes prior to October 7th. That's another policy that they refer to as called mowing the grass. Grass being what they would refer to as the Hamas. They wear the green bandana, so they would call it mowing the grass. About 2 weeks before October 7th, they would bomb an apartment building that I think resulted in 8 children dying. But this is the policy that they were conducting prior to October 7th. But after October 7th, it was all Israel saw was red. Every building was either hit with shrapnel or completely flattened. We'll show a video later where right now Gaza is within a ceasefire, but that is a very loose term. That is only for Hamas to be in the ceasefire. Israel still conducts airstrikes. You have.
I think this is almost standard Israeli doctrine, that you negotiate, you get the other side to ceasefire, and by then you've punished them, you've blown down their buildings, their houses, and everything. And they're desperate for peace. And Israeli doctrine is that you agree on peace terms, and then you never abide by them. You continue attacking and killing, maybe at a little bit more subdued level, but the killing continues. And there are bombings of Gaza that go on today under the ceasefire that we talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we talked about Smotrich. Or no, it's Ben Gvir. Smotrich is another one that's a very interesting character to watch in his rhetoric that he uses. But Ben Gvir has come out and said that we need to kill. This is during this ceasefire, 30 to 40 targets a night. This is there was the Jordanian, um, the one head in the Jordanian government, I believe, I can't remember her name, but she spoke about how Hamas is basically a band of orphans from previous airstrikes. You have like the on the ground, the boys that take up the arms. They're orphans. They don't really have everything that they once loved was taken from them, and so you have basically the greatest recruitment tool is what Israel is conducting right now, is to, level homes. Right now, Gaza is the home of the largest orphans, just by the sheer number of adults they've killed. They've left children. Children can withstand some of these leveling of these buildings because of how tiny they are. They are the primary ones that are going to survive. And so they have left Gaza as the home of the largest orphans and the largest children amputees. So you see this.
I can only imagine, Morgan, if Hamas were to give up all of their arms, I think there would just be just a phenomenal bloodletting. I can't imagine that this very brutal regime in Israel would look at that as an opportunity for peace. Because, we've heard all the talk about how, they were going to turn the Gaza Strip, home for 2.1 million people, into sort of a Jewish Riviera where you have all of these wealthy billionaires who would trot around there, and they'd have these mansions and that kind of thing. Well, what happens to the people who live there? This is a question. When I was a little boy, I was asked to read the book Exodus, which talked about how all of the European Jews decided to leave and go to Palestine, and I was taught to read a very touching book of what's her name, Anne's diary, forgetting part of the name, but anyway, the little girl who was reportedly
The Diary of Anne Frank. Yes.
Yeah, you helped me out a little bit. That's how long ago it was. I was probably 10 years old when I was reading these things, and there was some truth to them, and there was a tremendous amount of propaganda because people were being taught that the European Jewish people had a right to go to Palestine and to occupy it, to take it over. And nobody was supposed to ask the question, well, what about the people who own those homes, those farms? And I remember looking at a newspaper headline, and you had the Palestinian. Now, the Palestinians, everybody think, okay, the Palestinians are Muslims. Well, for people who have a very jaundiced view of Muslims, there were a lot of Palestinian Christians. So it was Christians and Muslims who were expelled from homes that they had owned for generations. And all of the indigenous people, the non-Jews, all of the indigenous people were driven from their homes, and their homes were simply taken over by these Europeans who came in and created a tremendous wave of terror. And, they were setting off, explosive devices. They were raping. They were just, and you would think, well, wait a minute. These are people who have somehow been sensitized by this Holocaust, and they would never do something like what they did. just, they were merciless towards the people. And just as a little boy who had been, taught all of the proper things that you were required to do, I couldn't help but look and say, what about those children who lived there before the Europeans came and took it over?
Yeah.
What happens to them? And the answer is that those people are destined to die. That it, it may not be written down in black and white, but they're supposed to disappear, and then you have a Riviera for Jewish settlers.
Yeah. I think that is probably, the most despicable aspect of this is this new plan to rebuild Gaza, but rebuild it for who? This was kind of in the very first the pushback, the conflict or the debate that was happening right after October 7th was this, this is for you guys to take back, reclaim Gaza. Israel pulled out in Gaza in 2006. They primarily have had just as much control. They control the air, the ports, the borders, what goes in, what goes out. They have had full control of that. Their feet may have not been on the ground, but they had immense control over that area. So there was this debate, okay, you guys are conducting these actions. You guys were basically waiting for this to happen so you would get the green light, the public okay to level this and take it over. And, Israel was completely insulted by that, saying that's not the case. Well, it's unfolding before our eyes. We just spoke about, you said if Hamas, pardon me, put down their arms within this 15-point peace plan that was, enacted a while ago. But, we'll get into this. The happenings of this are very unfortunate. Hamas has agreed to lay down all of its militarized arms in hopes that a non-biased peace force will come in and stabilize the area. They've agreed to it. The only ones who have rejected it are Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a plan that the U.S. is spearheading, primarily the Board of Peace, which we've spoken about backstage, which is very interesting. We talk about the protesters in America. Why were they protesting something that was happening in another country? It's because we were footing the bill. America has funded Israel's with these weapons that leveled Gaza. For the past 3 years, it has equaled up to over $20 billion. And now we are looking to take from taxpayer monies to fund the reconstruction of Gaza, which they are trying to allocate $17 billion. So you're looking at $37 billion are from American taxpayers are going to be used to level a place and rebuild it. And rebuild it for whom? We have yet to see, but it looks like it won't be for the Palestinians. I have a video that I would like to show within the peace plan that was agreed to. There was a yellow line. The yellow line would be Israel's way of solidifying protection of the area that Hamas would never come back into Israel. So they've encroached into Gaza, this yellow line. There have been multiple reports on this yellow line that it's not distinguishable. It's just like you go outside and the property line of your house to your neighbor's house, you really don't know it. There's not like this invisible fence where you touch it and you get a shock. But when a Palestinian crosses over this indistinguishable yellow line, they will be murdered by Israel because they're supposed to know better.
That happened just several days ago, where there was a farmer who was driving along his property, and it was near the yellow line, but it wasn't in the yellow line. And he had his 3-year-old son with him, and suddenly, out of nowhere, a bunch of IDF soldiers appeared, and they began firing. He immediately, stopped the vehicle. They continued firing, and they shot the the son in the head. The son hadn't died yet, but then they kept him from leaving to get medical attention, and and they refused to call medical attention themselves, and the little boy died in the father's arms after some time. The father had been shot in the leg also, um, and it's just you have leaders like Ben Gavir who has said that we should kill many of these people um, because they're not human. They're not human,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, this when you say that, you're inviting the worst elements of society to commit crimes, horrific crimes of murder and rape and so forth, against against the people that you define as being non-human. This is, there was something that the Nazis used to, various officials would say, well, so and so, these are Untermenschen. They were
Yeah.
sort of, uh, you know, less than fully human. And I mean, this is just almost like the blueprints. Like they're thinking, okay, this is what we want to be. We want to be a Nazi nation uh,
Mm-hmm.
that follows those same rules. Um, Now, it's interesting that uh, there's a Pew Research Center that has conducted a survey back in June, and you know, Israel used to be very, very, favorably viewed, but today 60% of Americans have an unfavorable view of Israel. And then they surveyed 36 different countries, and the pollster says that most expressed very unfavorable views of Israel, including 68% unfavorable in France, 69 in the UK, and 73% in Germany. Now, what's interesting is that the poor German people have been absolutely brutalized by this Holocaust thing. And because they've been so indoctrinated, well, this was wrong, these are things that were done, after the Germans have been taught that these things are unforgivable, all of a sudden, the people who are wailing the most loudly about the Holocaust are doing exactly the same thing. So you
Yeah.
have this tremendous backlash in Germany because the Germans are so sensitive to this idea of saying that certain people are less than human, um, that you can be as brutal as you want. So I tell you, it puts the future of Israel at risk. In my,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah, I know what we were talking about before, the yellow line. I have a video clip I would just like to play. We have some other clips that, I think we wanted to kind of touch upon what's happening in the West Bank too, which is very interesting what's unfolding regarding the U.S. ambassador to Israel, and what his new statements have been versus in the past. So before we go into that, I kind of want to play what Israel's doing in Gaza. We touched upon this yellow line that they're continually starting to creep in more. And in doing so, they're leaving, we don't have accurate numbers how many Palestinians have survived this engagement for the past 3 years, this genocide. But majority of them don't have homes. You are probably the fortunate maybe 0.5%. Your home is still standing and you're able to live in it. But majority of them live in tents along the coastline. So they are further pushing them into the sea. So I want to go ahead and play this and what Israel is doing with the land that's behind the red line that's more towards Israel. So we can go ahead and just add this to the stage.
Israel isn't just digging in, it's also tearing down. Many of Gaza's neighborhoods were destroyed during active fighting over 2 years. But as satellite images show, many more homes have been systematically flattened by Israeli forces since last October, after most fighting stopped. Near the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza, buildings still standing last November are now gone. And in Shujaiya, next to Gaza City, entire swaths of housing that are seen standing in images from October are blown up or bulldozed by April on both sides of the yellow line. UN experts have denounced the systematic detonation of residential buildings as re-engineering the geography of illegally occupied Gaza by Israel. Palestinians who've watched their homes destroyed say there's a plan.
Israel is trying everything to push the people to leave Gaza.
Alaa Hajjaj is a teacher, now living with his family in a tent in northern Gaza. The rubble of his house sits well behind the yellow line, a place he's not sure he will ever be able to reach again.
So I think it's important to see that not only are they solidifying their area, but what it looks like, destroying evidence of what they have done. There are bodies within that rubble. We will never know a true count by them getting rid of the rubble. It's completely horrific.
Morgan, the Hamas, which was the governing authority of Gaza, they looked at, oh, well, these are terrorists. They were the people who conducted all the day-to-day government operations. And they were able to report the casualties, the killing of people in Gaza during the initial incursion by the IDF. And the numbers were eye-popping. I mean, they went up and up and up, and finally they reached the level of 75,000 people. This is the retribution for 600 Israeli civilians and 600 Israeli military being killed in the initial clash. So now you're getting well over 50 to 1 death. But then what happens is then the whole governing operation in the Gaza Strip can no longer account for people. There's no longer any means of digging through the rubble and so forth. And so all of a sudden the numbers plateau, even though the killing, the bombing, the kneecapping continues. And we have people like Ben Gvir saying, we need targeted assassinations of 30 to 40 of these subhumans killed every night. And interestingly, he's not talking about doing it in the daylight. He's talking about surreptitiously going in and murdering people in large numbers. So it's unfortunate that the number 75,000 has stuck, because I don't think anybody seriously questioned the numbers that Hamas was publishing. But then the numbers, but so I think any reasonable person can imagine that at minimum there have probably been 200,000 people killed, not reported, and just the extermination is probably just the beginning. Is the actual kinetic murders, and then the rest will be starvation.
Yeah, I mean, just the sheer terror and trauma that they placed on the Palestinian people. We spoke about
Israel has control of what goes in and out. There are months which initiated this need for GHF. We had this targeted campaign to go after the Red Crescent and UNRWA and vilify them to be terrorist organizations or terrorist sympathizers to the point where all of their aid was cut, or or there would be retribution to pay if there was a country that would cut the aid to UNRWA, which gave rise to the GHF. But GHF was not sufficiently feeding the people at all. It was this other targeted terror campaign of, killing people, this psychological warfare of making them have to walk miles to get food, to get a bag of pasta or grain that they don't have any water to cook with because no water was provided. And so
when they would send people like that, the places they would allow some tiny bit of food to enter were right on the border, and so it meant that people had to travel many miles to find any food, and typically they would take the most fit young men who could go. So you might have an extended family. You've got elderly people, you've got little babies. So what do? You take that one good, healthy boy that you have, you send him, and he walks many miles, and then the Israelis set up these killing grounds where they would sort of give a signal, and all of a sudden thousands of Palestinians would rush to get some of that little bit of food that was available, and then almost without warning, then suddenly they would start closing things off. They start firing very close to where the people were, and so they would kill many of the young men who were the only person that the family could rely on, the person who would lift the elderly people from bed so that they could go to the bathroom at night and this kind of thing. All of a sudden, those are gone, and there's nobody left to help.
Yeah, it was a very methodical terror campaign done by Israel, and carried out by another U.S. taxpayer dollar-funded operation. I know that we want to save some time and pivot towards what's happening in the West Bank. There's this very important video. It's about 2 minutes and 30 seconds from Tucker Carlson, who plays, some elements of the settler terror that goes on in the West Bank. So go ahead and play that, and we can pivot to some of the terrors that are happening in the West Bank.
Something worth watching. So what you're about to see is video of the father, accompanied by a news crew, attempting to go to the place where his son was beaten to death during these pogroms. Watch.
Kamel Muslit hasn't been able to reach this land in over a year. This is the hillside where his son, Saif, an American citizen, was killed.
Looks like it's down here if you want to walk. Yeah.
Beaten to death by Israeli settlers exactly 1 year ago. Since then, settlers have illegally occupied the area, preventing this father from getting the closure he so desperately seeks.
We have to keep an eye because usually they'll come down that way.
But this solemn, sacred moment won't last. Within seconds, we spot a car speeding towards us. We start to leave, but as we drive away, we see that 4 settlers have set up a roadblock. Armed with clubs and rocks, they try and block our way, first with their bodies, and then...
And now it looks like he's trying to slash our tires. He's trying to slash our tires.
Oh, he's got a knife. He's going for the tires.
A group of independent journalists and activists are in the car behind us.
Move! Move, bitch!
But their vehicle isn't armored. But the settlers aren't done. More arrive, blocking another road before chasing us and attacking us again.
No, they're trying to stop our car again. They're hitting us.
We finally make it back to safety, where I get on the phone with the Israeli military, which is responsible for security in this area. But settlers have also called the military, And these soldiers are only interested in harassing us, refusing to take action against the settlers.
You think, well, that couldn't possibly happen now. Well, in fact, it is happening now. Right now, more than a dozen American citizens have been murdered in pogroms in the occupied territories that Israel controls, the West Bank. And they've been murdered by Israelis, mostly Israeli settlers, the ones conducting these pogroms, armed by the U.S. government, carrying American rifles. And if you think the term pogrom is too strong, you don't know the details of what's happening there. Israeli settlers, many of them American citizens, carrying American weapons, murdering the local population, Palestinians, some of whom, more than a dozen of whom, have been American. And by the way, who are prohibited from defending themselves. They cannot carry weapons, of course. Palestinians can't carry weapons on their own land, but Israeli settlers who seek to steal that land can. So these pogroms have been ongoing, of course, but most Americans have no idea that American citizens have been murdered during the course of them. And they have no idea because the media, by and large, don't report it. And American officials have no interest in talking about it. This is...
I think that's very important. We spoke about the particular man that they're referring to that was murdered, that was beaten to death and murdered. His cousin, Muhammad Ibrahim, was a little boy that was, arrested by the Israeli government. He was 15 years old when he was arrested, and he was released when he was 16 years old by the help of people who would go to Congress and tell the congressional members that this was actually happening. And they had no idea that there was an American boy that was in Israeli prison under just there was an Israeli settler that claimed that he threw a rock. He never say that he witnessed Muhammad throwing the rock, but just claimed it to be him. And therefore he was thrown into an Israeli prison. And he got scabies while he was in there. He was severely malnourished. He had witnessed children die because it was a children's prison. Israel is one of the only nations that tries children in military court. A child died because he wasn't given adequate medical care when he was sick, because they keep these prisons very cold at night. They don't give them adequate food. That was his cousin who was murdered they were both American citizens. And this is happening on a daily basis to the Palestinians in extreme measures. And I think that I have immense respect for someone like Tucker Carlson, who dedicates time on his show to show something so important, such as the terror that's happening in the West Bank. So I wanted to show it through that clip and kind of get some of your talking points on what's really going on in the West Bank.
Yeah, Tucker Carlson is truly an American treasure. He, he's very, very successful on Fox News, and one of the most popular reporters anywhere, or commentators anywhere. And he began to question things. He began to look at things that you were not supposed to look at. There is an enormous power of censorship in America when it comes to Israel. For example, Israel is one of the greatest nuclear powers on earth. Mm-hmm. And you can find it subtly buried in articles in the Washington Post or New York Times, but it's never permitted to be broadcast to the American people, because then people will start to say, well, wait a minute, they're so terrified about Iran getting a nuclear weapon, and they've got massive stores of nuclear weapons. They have submarines that can fire nuclear missiles. And so the whole thing starts at, wait a minute. Where is this great danger from Iran even if they did? Now, they never set about creating a nuclear weapon. They might, after all that's been done to them now. But but my point is this tremendous unspoken censorship rule that prevents people, in the media from saying anything. And it just got to the point where the horror was so great that Tucker Carlson, he just, I'm going to speak out, and he left Fox News, and he has continued just courageously speaking out, interviewing people who are going through these horrors. And I think it's a great blessing.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, yes. And I think his voice is very, very powerful. It reaches a lot of people that otherwise would not have known this. That's why I find the voice like his very, very important. I know that we're kind of gearing towards the end of the show, and I think we touched upon a lot of the reasons why we view what's happening in in Palestine, Gaza, West Bank, to be reminiscent of the events that took place during the Holocaust, in the Night of Broken Glass. I think we've done an adequate job at displaying, the various points of the terror that's subjected on the Palestinians to prove our point. So I just want to kind of pass it to you and do concluding thoughts, and we'll say.
Yes, I'll just comment on one of the, with the midterm elections coming up. We've got the race in South Carolina over, who will be the next senator from South Carolina. And the Trump administration has dutifully endorsed the sister of Lindsey Graham.
Mm-hmm.
Lindsey Graham, quite frankly, was never a very good representative of South Carolina. He was very, very close to John McCain. He was part of the Gang of Seven, which was a combination of liberal Democrats and liberal Republicans trying to break down the borders and allow unfettered immigration into the United States. I mean, he was a rotten senator. And what's made him a great hero is he was killed, or no, he wasn't killed, but he died.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, we have his sister who has no qualifications of note, and suddenly we're told, well, President feels like sort of for old time's sake, we ought to make her the senator to represent the entire population of the state of South Carolina, just for old time's sake. And she was recently in a debate with her opponent. Is it Ralph Norman?
You would know better than me because I have not been following that.
For not knowing, but anyway, she has a very credible opponent in the Republican primary, and during the debate, she was asked a question by the narrator. Well, what do you think about the situation in Taiwan? And do you see that as a vital national interest? And I don't know whether she knew where Taiwan was. I mean, maybe she had heard the name, but she said, frankly, this is just not my thing. I just don't know about foreign policy. You're talking about someone who is going to be one of 100 senators who set the direction for American policy, for war and peace, for impeaching or not impeaching a president of the United States. And I think what's happened is Lindsey Graham's operation was a wholly owned subsidiary of the Zionist movement. He was there to ram through various packets of money and policies and so forth for Israel. And I think the reason that his sister is being promoted by the administration is because she is viewed as being a wholly owned subsidiary of the Zionist movement. She doesn't have to know anything. All she has to do,
Carry on the torch, yes.
she has a staff in place that is Lindsey Graham's Israel First staff. All she's got to do is vote whatever way they tell her to vote.
Mm-hmm.
It's clear that is the plan. And so I would hope that the people of South Carolina have the good sense to say, you know what, there are lots of pressing needs that the people of South Carolina have, and we don't need an Israel First person who's going to devote all of her time and attention to serving the interests of the Zionists, the global Zionists. We need people who are going to help build roads and schools and businesses in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm. I hope to. I really hope that people of South Carolina wise up and don't continue on with the Graham status quo. So I want to thank you for today, Senator. You know, I'm really passionate about what goes on over there and aims to try and stop it and call out my government's active role in it. So I thank you for giving me that opportunity, and I want to encourage everybody to tune in next week to focus on the news. So thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Morgan.